All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. And I did not turn down my monitor, so a little bit of feedback there. Sorry. All right, so we'll see how well tonight goes. We've got a little bit of continuing tech problems going on. The webcam has about given up the ghost. I've had to fight with it for the last half hour to get it to consistently stay on. But that should hopefully be behind us. I've got a new one on order, so we'll hopefully have a fresh, nice webcam ready to get the tracking done and all by Tuesday's stream. At least I should hope. And that should resolve a fair few of our problems here. While I'm talking about that, I'm having to wind cables and plug in my headset. Because, why not? There we go. Right, so, on to the actual reason we're here. Let's settle in, grab a book, grab a drink, try and stay warm, and there goes the camera again. And we will get ready to get back to where we left off with Genji Monogatari. This is our third night reading of this book, and it is a bit of a story of ups and downs. Genji himself is going everywhere from very relatable bystander looking down upon friends who really should know better, to kind of the perpetrator of his own misadventures. So, let's see what other... Oh, for God's sake, this camera keeps going out. Oh. Alright. We'll see. And yeah, that is, that's very accurate to any sort of young person's experience throughout the history of the world. People are young and often dumb. And sometimes they get better. Not always. So we'll have to see which trajectory young Genji goes. Whether he does get better, or whether we have to suffer through another Henry. Hikaru, Henry, Hikaru, Henry. We'll see. We'll see. Alright, so, we left off about halfway through chapter 4 last time, as we were finding very quickly the formatting for this book is not quite so serendipitous as a lot of the others that we've read. The longer chapters don't lend themselves particularly well to a structured sequence of breaks on the hour, finishing at the 2-hour mark. But we make do, at least to find a reasonable breaking off point. So, when we left Genji, he was having a bit of an affair with the woman in the common quarter, who is of the quote-unquote lower class that his friends so derided as being not worth their time. But this one seems to be an interesting lady, who doesn't particularly mind that he shows up in disguise and never gives his name, or any number of other wildly red flags. So there's a lot of blame to go around for how this situation is playing out. One, Genji is raising a ton of red flags. Two, Lady Yugao is ignoring all of these red flags because he's just so pretty. Let us not forget, it takes two to tango. Alright, let's jump back in and we'll see where this sort of misadventure of a Chinese imperial court soap opera will take us next. Yeah, there's, sometimes you just gotta gamble on the crazy scale, and that goes for everyone. It's hot versus crazy. It's a continuum, and sometimes you come off the worst for that bet. All right. Discarding all prudence, he sent for the maid Ukon and bade her order his servants to fetch a coach. The affair was soon known to all the household, and the ladies were at first somewhat uneasy at seeing their mistress carried off in this fashion, but on the whole they did not think he looked the sort of person who would do her any harm. It was now almost daylight. The cocks had stopped crowing. The voice of an old man, a pilgrim preparing for the ascent of the holy mountain, sounded somewhere not far away, and as at each prayer he bent forward to touch the ground with his head, they could hear with what pain and difficulty he moved. What he could be asking for in his prayers, this old man whose life seemed fragile as the morning dew. Namu Torai no Doshi, glory be to the Savior that shall come. Now they could hear the words. Listen, said Genji tenderly. Is not that an open, that our love shall last through many lives to come? And he recited the poem. Do not prove false this omen of the pilgrim's chant, that even in lives to come, our love shall last unchanged. Then, unlike the lovers in the everlasting wrong, who prayed that they might be as the twin birds that share a wing, for they remembered that this story had ended very sadly. It's not the first time this particular poem's been mentioned, actually. They prayed, may our love last till Maitreya comes as a Buddha into the world. But she, still distrustful, answered his poem with the verse, such sorrow have I known in this world that I shall have small hope of worlds to come. Her versification was still a little tentative. She was thinking with pleasure that the setting moon would light them on their way, and Genji was just saying so when suddenly the moon disappeared behind a bank of clouds. But there was still great beauty in the dawning sky. Anxious to be gone before it was quite light, he hurried her away to the coach and put Ukon by her side. They drove to an untenanted mansion, which was not far off. While he waited for the steward to come out, Genji noticed that the gates were crumbling away. Dense shinobu grass grew around them, so somber, an entrance he had never seen. There was a thick mist, and the dew was so heavy that when he raised the carriage blind, his sleeve was drenched. Never yet has such an adventure as this befallen me, said Genji. So I am, as you may imagine, rather excited. And he made a poem in which he said that though love's folly had existed since the beginning of the world, never could man have set out more rashly at the break of day into a land unknown. But to you, this is no great novelty? She blushed, and in her turn made a poem. I am as the moon that walks the sky, not knowing what menace the cruel hills may hold in store. High though she sweeps, her light may suddenly be blotted out. She seemed very depressed and nervous, but this he attributed to the fact that she had probably always lived in small houses, where everything was huddled together, and he was amused at the idea that this large mansion should overawe her. They drove in, and while the room was being got ready, they remained in the carriage, which had been drawn up alongside of the balustrade. Ukon, looking very innocent all the while, was inwardly comparing this excursion with her mistress's previous adventures. She had noticed the tone of extreme deference with which this latest lover had been received by the steward, and had begun to draw her own conclusions. So someone's paying attention, at least. The mist was gradually clearing away. They left the coach and went into the room, which had been prepared for them. Though so quickly improvised, their quarters were admirably clean and well provided, for the steward's son had previously been a trusted house servant of Genji's, and had also worked at the Great Hall. Coming now to their room, he offered to send for some of Genji's gentlemen. For, he said, I cannot bear to see you going unattended. Do nothing of the kind, said Genji. I have come here because I do not wish to be disturbed. No one but yourself is to know that I have used this house. And he exacted a promise of absolute secrecy. No regular meal had been prepared, but the steward brought them a little rice porridge. Then they lay down again to sleep together, for the first time in this unfamiliar and so strangely different place. Oh yes, swearing everyone to secrecy is very normal, very regular. No flags are being raised. Don't worry about it. The sun was high when they awoke. Genji went and opened the shutters himself. How deserted the garden looked. Certainly, here there was no one to spy upon them. He looked out into the distance. Dense woods fast turning to jungle, and nearer the house not a flower or bush, but only unkempt autumn grasslands, and a pond choked with weeds. It was a wild and desolate place. It seemed that the steward and his men must live in some outbuilding, or lodge at a distance from the house, for here was no sign of sound of life. It is, I must own, a strange and forsaken place to which we have come, but no ghost or evil fairy will dare molest you while I am here. It pained her very much that he was still masked, and indeed such precaution was quite out of keeping with the stage at which they had now arrived. So, at last, reciting a poem in which he reminded her that all their love down to this moment, when the flower opened its petals to the morning dew, had come from a chance vision, seen casually from the street. Half turning his face away, for a moment he let her see him unmasked. What of the shining dew? He asked, using the words that she had written on the fan. How little I knew I of its beauty, who had but in the twilight doubted and guessed. So she answered his poem in a low and halting voice. She need not have feared, for to him, poor as the verses were, they seemed delightful. And indeed, the beauty of his uncovered face, suddenly revealed to her in this black wilderness of dereliction and decay, surpassed all loveliness that she had ever dreamed of or imagined. I cannot but wonder that while I still set this barrier between us, you did not choose to tell me all that I long to know. But now it would be very unkind of you not to tell me your name. I am like the fisherman's daughter in the song, she said. I have no name or home. But for all that she would not tell him who she was, she seemed much comforted that he had let her see him. Do as you please about it, said Genji at last, but for a while he was out of temper. Soon they had made it up again, and so the day passed. Presently, Koremitsu came to their quarters, bringing fruit and other viands. He would not come in, for he was frightened that Ukon would rate him mercilessly for the part he had played in arranging the abduction of her mistress. He had now come to the conclusion that the lady must possess charms which had wholly overlooked, or Genji would certainly never have taken all this trouble about her, and he was touched at his own magnanimity in surrendering to his master a prize which he might well have kept for himself. It was an evening of marvelous stillness. Genji sat watching the sky. The lady found the inner room, where she was sitting depressingly dark and gloomy. He raised the blinds of the front room, and came to sit with her. They watched the light of the sunset glowing in each other's eyes, and in her wonder at his adorable beauty and tenderness, she forgot all her fears. At last she was shy with him no longer, and he thought that the newfound boldness and merriment became her very well. She lay by his side till night. He saw that she was again wearing the plaintive expression of a frightened child, so quickly closing the partition door, he brought in the great lamp, saying, "Outwardly, you are no longer shy with me, but I can see that deep down in your heart there is still some sediment of rancor and distrust. It is not kind to use me so." And again he was cross with her. What were the people at the palace thinking? Would he have been sent for? How far would the messengers pursue their search? He became quite agitated. Then there was the great lady in the 6th ward. What a frenzy she must be in! This time, however, she really had good cause to be jealous. These and other unpleasant considerations were crowding into his head, when, looking at the girl who lay beside him so trustfully, unconscious of all that was going on in his mind, he was suddenly filled with an overwhelming tenderness towards her. How tiresome the other was, with her eternal susceptibilities, jealousies, and suspicions! For a while, at any rate, he would stop seeing her. As the night wore on, they began sometimes to doze. Suddenly, Genji saw standing over him the figure of a woman, tall and majestic. You who think yourself so fine, how comes it that you have brought to toy with you here this worthless common creature picked up at random in the streets? I am astonished and displeased. And with this she made as though to drag the lady from his side. Thinking that this was some nightmare or hallucination, he roused himself and sat up. The lamp had gone out. Somewhat agitated, he drew his sword and laid it beside him, calling as he did so for Ukon. She came at once, looking a great deal scared herself. Please wake the watchman in the cross wing, he said, and tell him to bring a candle. All in the dark like this? How can I? She answered. Don't be childish, said Genji, laughing, and clapped his hands. The sound echoed desolately through the empty house. He could not make anyone hear, and meanwhile, he noticed that his mistress was trembling from head to foot. What should he do? He was still undecided, when, suddenly, she burst out into a cold sweat. She seemed to be losing consciousness. Do not fear, sir, said Ukon. All her life she has been subject to these nightmare fits. He remembered now how tired she had seemed in the morning, and how she had lain with her eyes turned upwards, as though in pain. I will go myself and wake someone, he said. I am tired of clapping with only echoes to answer me. Do not leave her. And, drawing Ukon towards the bed, he went in the direction of the main western door. But when he opened it, he found that the lamp in the crosswing had also gone out. A wind had risen. The few attendants he had brought with him were already in bed. There was indeed only the steward's son, the young man who had once been Genji's body servant, and the one young courtier who had attended him on all his visits. They answered when he called and sprang to their feet. Come with a candle, he said to the steward's son, and tell my man to get his bow and keep on twanging the string as loud as he can. I wonder anyone should sleep so soundly in such a deserted place. What has happened to Koremitsu? He waited for some time, but as you seemed to have no need of him, he went home, saying he would be back at daybreak. Genji's man had been an imperial bowman, and making a tremendous din with his bow, he strode toward the servants' lodge, crying, Fire! Fire! At the top of his voice. The twanging of the bow reminded Genji of the palace. The roll call of night courtiers must be over. The bowman's roll call must be actually going on. It was not so very late. He groped his way back into the room. She was lying just as he had left her, with Ukon face downwards beside her. What are you doing there? He cried. Have you gone mad with fright? You have heard, no doubt, that in such lovely places as this, fox spirits sometimes try to cast a spell upon men. But, dear people, you need not fear. I have come back, and will not let such creatures harm you. And, so saying, he dragged Ukon from the bed. Oh, sir, she said, I felt so queer and frightened that I fell flat down upon my face, and what my poor lady must be going through I dare not think. Then try not to add to her fright, said Genji, and pushing her aside, bent over the prostrate form. The girl was scarcely breathing. He touched her. She was quite limp. She did not know him. Perhaps some accursed thing, some demon, had tried to snatch her spirit away. She was so timid, so childishly helpless. The man came with the candle. Ukon was still too frightened to move. Genji placed a screen, so as to hide the bed, and called the man to him. It was, of course, contrary to etiquette that he should serve Genji himself, and he hesitated in embarrassment, not venturing even to ascend the dais. "Come here," said Genji impatiently. "Use your common sense." Reluctantly, the man gave him the light, and, as he held it towards the bed, he saw for a moment the figure which had stood there in his dream still hovering beside the pillow. Suddenly, it vanished. He had read in old tales of such apparitions and of their power, and was in great alarm. But, for the moment, he was so full of concern for the lady who now lay motionless on the bed, that he gave no thought to that menacing vision, and, lying down beside her, began gently to move her limbs. Already they were growing cold. Her breathing had quite stopped. What could he do? To whom could he turn for help? He ought to send for a priest. He tried to control himself, but he was very young, and seeing her lying there all still and pale, he could contain himself no longer, and crying, "Come back to me, my own darling, come back to life! Do not look at me so strangely!" He flung his arms about her, but now she was quite cold. Her face was set in a dull, senseless stare. Suddenly Ukon, who had been so busy with her own fears, came to herself again, and set up the most dismal weeping. He disregarded her. Something had occurred to him. There was a story of how a certain minister was waylaid by a demon as he passed through the southern hall. The man, Genji remembered, had been prostrate with fear. But in the end, he revived and escaped. No, she could not really be dead. And turning to Ukon, he said firmly, "Come now, we cannot have you making such a hideous noise in the middle of the night." But he himself was stunned with grief, and though he gave Ukon distracted orders, scarce knew what he was doing. Presently, he sent for the steward's son and said to him, "Someone here has had a fright, and is in a very bad way. I want you to go to Koremitsu's house, and tell him to come as quickly as he can. If his brother the priest is there too, take him aside and tell him quietly that I should like to see him at once. But do not speak loud enough for the nun, their mother, to hear, for I would not have her know of this excursion." But though he managed to say the words, his brain was all the while in a hideous turmoil. For added to the ghastly thought that he himself had caused her death, there was the dread and horror with which the whole place now inspired him. It was past midnight. A violent storm began to rise, sighing dismally as it swept the pine trees that clustered round the house. And all the while, some strange bird, an owl he supposed, kept screeching hoarsely. Utter desolation on all sides. No human voice, no friendly sound. Why had he chosen this hideous place? Ukon had fainted, and was lying by her mistress's side. Was she too going to die of fright? No, he must not give way to such thoughts. He was now the only person left who was capable of action. Was there nothing he could do? The candle was burning badly. He lit it again. Over by the screen in the corner of the main room, something was moving. There it was again, but in another corner now. There was a sound of footsteps treading cautiously. It still went on. Now they were coming up behind him. If only Koremitsu would return. Koremitsu was a rover, and long time was wasted in looking for him. Would it never be day? It seemed to him that this night was lasting 1,000 years, but now, somewhere, a long way off, a cock crowed. Why had fate seen fit to treat him thus? He felt that it must be as a punishment for all the strange and forbidden amours into which in these last years he had, despite himself, been drawn. But now that this unheard-of horror had befallen him, and such things, though one may keep them secret for a time, always come out in the end, he minded most that the Emperor would be certain to discover sooner or later about this and all his other affairs. Then there was the general scandal. Everyone would know. The very gutter boys would make merry over him. Never must he do such things again, or his reputation would utterly collapse. At last, Koremitsu arrived. He prided himself on being always ready to carry out his master's wishes immediately, at whatever hour of the night or day, and he thought it very provoking of Genji to have sent for him just on the one occasion when he was not to hand. And now that he had come, his master did not seem able to give him any orders, but stood speechless in front of him. Uko, hearing Koremitsu's voice, suddenly came to herself, and remembering what had happened, burst into tears. And now Genji, who, while he alone was there, had supported and encouraged the weeping maidservant, relieved at last by Koremitsu, could contain himself no longer. And suddenly realizing again the terrible thing that had befallen him, he burst into uncontrollable weeping. "Something horrible has happened here," he managed to say at last. "Too dreadful to explain. I have heard that when such things as this suddenly befall, certain scriptures should be read. I would have this done, and prayers said. That is why I asked you to bring your brother." "He went up to the mountain yesterday," said Koremitsu. "But I see that there has been terrible work here afoot. Was it in some sudden fit of madness that you did this thing?" Genji shook his head. So moved was Koremitsu at the sight of his master weeping, that he too began to sob. Had he been an older man, versed in the ways of the world, he might have been of some use in such a crisis. But both of them were young, and both were equally perplexed. At last Koremitsu said, "One thing at least is clear. The steward's son must not know, for though he himself can be depended upon, he is the sort of person who is sure to tell all his relatives, and they might meddle disastrously in the affair. We had best get clear of this house as quietly as we can." "Perhaps," said Genji, "but it would be hard to find a less frequented place than this." "At any rate," Koremitsu continued, "we cannot take her to her own house, for there her gentlewoman, who loved her dearly, would raise such a weeping and wailing as would soon bring a pack of neighbors swarming around, and all would quickly be known. If only I knew of some mountain temple, for there such things are customary, and pass almost unnoticed." He paused and reflected. "There is a lady I once knew who has become a nun, and now lives on the Higashiyama. She was my father's wet nurse, and is now very old and bent. She does not, of course, live alone, but no outside people come there." A faint light was already showing in the sky when Koremitsu brought the carriage in. Thinking that Genji would not wish to move the body himself, he wrapped it in a rush mat and carried it towards the carriage. How small she was to hold! Her face was calm and beautiful. He felt no repulsion. He could find no way to secure her hair, and when he began to carry her, it overflowed and hung towards the ground. Genji saw, and his eyes darkened. A hideous anguish possessed him. He tried to follow the body, but Koremitsu dissuaded him, saying, "You must ride back to your palace as quickly as you can. You have just time to get there before the stir begins." And, putting Ukon into the carriage, he gave Genji his horse. Then, pulling up his silk trousers to the knee, he accompanied the carriage on foot. It was a very singular procession, but Koremitsu, seeing his master's terrible distress, forgot for the moment his own dignity, and walked stolidly on. Genji, hardly conscious of what went on around him, had arrived at last in ghostly pallor at his house. "Where do you come from, my lord? How ill you look!" questions assailed him. But he hurried to his room and lay behind its curtain. He tried to calm himself, but hideous thoughts tormented him. Why had he not insisted upon going with her? What if, after all, she were not dead, and waking up should find that he had thus abandoned her? While these wild thoughts chased through his brain, a terrible sensation of choking began to torment him. His head ached. His body seemed to be on fire. Indeed, he felt so strange that he thought he too was about to die suddenly and inexplicably, as she had done. The sun was now high, but he did not get up. His gentleman, with murmurs of astonishment, tried every means to rouse him. He sent away the dainties they had brought, and lay hour after hour plunged in the darkest thoughts. A messenger arrived from the Emperor. "His Majesty has been uneasy since yesterday, when his envoys sought everywhere for your Highness in vain." The young lords, too, came from the great hall. He would see none of them but Tono Chujo, and even him he made stand outside his curtain while he spoke to him. "My foster-mother has been very ill since the 5th month. She shaved her head and performed other penances, in consequence of which, or so it seems, she recovered a little and got up. But is very much enfeebled. She sent word that she desired to see me once more before she died, and as I was very fond of her when I was a child, I could not refuse. While I was there, a servant in the house fell ill, and died quite suddenly. Out of consideration for me, they removed the body at nightfall. But as soon as I was told of what had happened, I remembered that the fast of the 9th month was at hand, and for this reason I have not thought it right to present myself to the Emperor, my father. Moreover, since early morning I have had a cough and a very bad headache, so you will forgive me for treating you in this way. I will give the Emperor your message, but I must tell you that last night, when you were out, he sent messengers to look for you and seemed, if I may venture to say so, to be in a very ill humor. Tono Chujo turned to go, but, pausing a moment, came back to Genji's couch and said quietly, "What really happened to you last night? What you told me just now cannot possibly be true." "You need not go into details," answered Genji impatiently. "Simply tell him that unintentionally I became exposed to a pollution, and apologize to him for me as best you can." He spoke sharply, but in his heart there was only an unspeakable sadness, and he was very tired. All day he lay hidden from sight. Once he sent for Tono Chujo's brother, Kurodo no Ben, and gave him a formal message for the Emperor. The same excuse would serve for the Great Hall, and he sent a similar message there, and to other houses where he might be expected. At dusk, Koremitsu came. The story of Genji's pollution had turned all visitors from the door, and Koremitsu found his palace utterly deserted. "What happened?" said Genji, summoning him. "Are you sure that she is dead?" And holding his sleeve before his face, he wept. "All is over. Of that there is no doubt," said Koremitsu, also in tears. "And since it is not possible for them to keep the body long, I have arranged with a very respectable, aged priest, who is my friend, that the ceremony shall take place tomorrow, since tomorrow chances to be a good calendar day." "And what of her gentlewomen?" asked Genji. I fear she will not live," said Koremitsu. "She cries out that she must follow her mistress, and this morning, had I not held her, she would have cast herself from a high rock. She threatened to tell the servants at my lady's house, but I prevailed upon her to think the matter over quietly before she did this." "Poor thing," said Genji. "Small wonder that she should be thus distracted. I, too, am feeling strangely disordered, and do not know what will become of me." "Torment yourself no more," said Koremitsu. "All things happen as they must. Here is one who will handle this matter very prudently for you, and none shall be the wiser." "Happen as they must. You are right," said Genji. "And so I'm trying to persuade myself. But in the pursuit of one's own wanton pleasures, to have done harm, and to have caused someone's death, that is a hideous crime, a terrible load of sin to bear with me through the world. Do not tell even your sister, much less your mother the nun, for I am ashamed that she should even know I have ever done that kind of thing." "Do not fear," answered Koremitsu. "Even to the priests, who must to a certain extent be let into the secret, I have told a long made-up tale." And Genji felt a little easier in his mind. The waiting women of his palace were sorely puzzled. First, he says he has been defiled and cannot go to court, and now he sits whispering and sighing. What could it all mean? "Again, I beg you," said Genji at last, "to see that everything is done as it should be." He was thinking all the time of the elaborate court funerals which he had witnessed. He had, indeed, seen no others, and imagined Koremitsu directing a complicated succession of rituals. "I will do what I can. It will be no such great matter," he answered and turned to go. Suddenly, Genji could bear no longer the thought that he should never see her again. "You will think it very foolish of me," he said, "but I am coming with you. I shall ride on horseback." "If your heart is set upon it," said Koremitsu, it is not for me to reason with you. Let us start soon, so that we may be back before the night is over." So, putting on the hunting dress and other garments in which he had disguised himself before, he left his room. Already the most hideous anguish possessed him, and now, as he set out upon this strange journey, to the dark thoughts that filled his mind was added a dread, lest his visit might rouse to some fresh fury the mysterious power which had destroyed her. Should he go? He hesitated, but though he knew that this way lay no cure for his sadness, yet, if he did not see her now, never again perhaps in any life to come, would he meet the face and form that he had loved so well. So, with Koremitsu and the one same groom to bear him company, he set out upon the road. The way seemed endless. The moon of the 17th night had risen and lit up the whole space of the Kamo plain, and in the light of the outrunners' torches, the countryside towards Toribeno now came dimly into sight. But Genji, in his sickness and despair, saw none of this, and suddenly, walking from the stupor into which he had fallen, found that they had arrived. The nun's cell was in a chapel, built along the wall of a house. It was a desolate spot, but the chapel itself was very beautiful. The light of the visitors' torches flickered through the open door. In the inner room, there was no sound but that of a woman weeping by herself. In the outer room were several priests talking together, or was it praying, in hushed voices. In the neighboring temples, vespers were over and there was absolute stillness. Only towards the Kiyomizu were lights visible, and many figures seemed to throng the hillside. A senior priest, son of the aged nun, now began to recite the scriptures in an impressive voice, and Genji, as he listened, felt the tears come into his eyes. He went in. Ukon was lying behind a screen. When she heard him enter, she turned the lamp to the wall. What terrible thing was she trying to hide from him? But when he came nearer, he saw, to his joy, that the dead lady was not changed in any way whatsoever, but lay there, very calm and beautiful, and feeling no horror or fear at all, he took her hand and said, "Speak to me once again. Tell me why. For so short a while you came to me and filled my heart with gladness, and then so soon forsook me, who loved you so well." And he wept long and bitterly by her side. The priests did not know who he was, but they were touched by his evident misery, and themselves shed tears. He asked Ukon to come back with him, but she answered, "I have served this lady since she was a little child, and never once, for so much as an hour, have I left her. How can I suddenly part from one who was so dear to me and serve in another's house? And I must now go and tell her people what has become of her, for, such is the manner of her death, if I do not speak soon, there will be an outcry that it was I who was to blame, and that would be a terrible thing for me, sir." And she burst into tears, wailing, "I will lie with her upon the pyre. My smoke shall mingle with hers." "Poor soul," said Genji, "I do not wonder at your despair, but this is the way of the world. Late or soon we must all go where she is gone. Take comfort and trust in me." So he thought to console her, but in a moment he added, "Those, I know, are but hollow words. I too care no longer for life, and would gladly follow her." So he spoke, giving her in the end but little comfort. "The night is far spent," said Koremitsu. "We must now be on our way." And with so many backward looks, and a heart full to bursting, he left the house. A heavy dew had fallen, and the mist was so thick that it was hard to see the road. On the way, it occurred to him that she was still wearing his scarlet cloak, which he had lent her when they would lay down together on the last evening. How closely their lives had been entwined! Noting that he sat very unsteadily in his saddle, Koremitsu walked beside him and gave him a hand. But when they came to a dike, he lost hold, and his master fell to the ground. Here he lay in great pain and bewilderment. "I shall not live to finish the journey," he said. "I have not strength to go so far." Koremitsu, too, was sorely troubled, for he felt that, despite all Genji's insistence, he ought never to have allowed him, fever-stricken as he was, to embark upon this disastrous journey. In great agitation, he plunged his hands in the river and prayed to Our Lady Kwannon of Kiyomizu. Genji, too, roused himself at last, and forced himself to pray inwardly to the Buddha. And so, they managed to start upon their journey again. And, in the end, with Koremitsu's help, he reached his palace. This sudden journey, undertaken so late at night, had seemed to all his household the height of imprudence. They had noted for some while past his nightly wanderings grow more and more frequent. But though often agitated and preoccupied, never had he returned so haggard as that morning. What could be the object of these continual excursions? And they shook their heads in great concern. Genji flung himself upon his bed and lay there in fever and pain for several days. He was growing very weak. The news was brought to the emperor, who was greatly distressed, and ordered continual prayers to be said for him in all the great temples. And indeed, there were more special services and purification ceremonies and incantations than I have room to rehearse. When it became known that this prince, so famous for his great charm and beauty, was likely soon to die, there was a great stir in all the kingdom. Sick though he was, he did not forget to send for Ugo and have her enrolled among his gentlewomen. Koremitsu, who was beside himself with anxiety concerning his master, yet managed on her arrival to calm himself and give to Ukon friendly instruction in her new duties, for he was touched by the helpless plight in which she had been left. And Genji, whenever he felt a little better, would use her to carry messages and letters, so that she soon grew used to waiting upon him. She was dressed in deep black, and though not at all handsome, was a pleasant enough-looking woman. It seems that the fate which so early stayed your lady's course has willed that I, too, should be but little longer for this world. I know in what sore distress you were left by the loss of one who was for so many years your mistress and friend, and it was my purpose to have comforted you in your bereavement by every care and kindness I could devise. For this reason, indeed, it grieves me that I shall survive her for so short a time. So, somewhat stiltedly, he whispered to Ukon, and being now very weak, he could not refrain from tears. Apart from the fact that his death would leave her utterly without resource, she had now quite taken to him, and would have been very sorry if he had died. His gentlemen ran hither and thither, distracted. The emperor's envoys thronged thick as the feet of the raindrops. Hearing of his father's distress and anxiety, Genji strove hard to reassure him by pretending to some slight respite or improvement. His father-in-law, too, showed great concern, calling every day for news and ordering the performance of various rites and potent liturgies. It was, perhaps, as a result of this, that having been dangerously ill for more than 20 days, he took a turn for the better. And soon, all his symptoms began to disappear. On the night of his recovery, the term of his defilement also ended, and hearing that the emperor was still extremely uneasy about him, he determined to reassure the court by returning to his official residence at the palace. His father-in-law came to fetch him in his own carriage, and, rather irritatingly, urged upon him all sorts of remedies and precautions. For some while, everything in the world to which he had now returned seemed strange to him, and he, indeed, scarce knew himself. But by the 20th day of the 9th month, his recovery was complete, nor did the pallor and thinness of his face become him by any means ill. At times he would stare vacantly before him and burst into loud weeping, and seeing this there were not wanting those who said that he was surely possessed. Often he was sent for Ukon, and once, when they had been talking in the still of the evening, he said to her, "There is one thing which still puzzles me. Why would she never tell me who she was? For even if she was indeed, as she once said, a fisherman's child, it was a strange perversity to use such reticence with one who loved her so well." "You ask why she hid her name from you?" said Ukon. "Can you wonder at it? When could she have been expected to tell you her name? Not that it would have meant much to you, if you had heard it. For from the beginning you treated her with a strange mistrust, coming with such secrecy and mystery as might well make her doubt whether you were indeed a creature of the waking world. But though you never told her, she knew well enough who you were, and the thought that you would not be thus secret, had you regarded her as more than a mere plaything or idle distraction, was very painful to her. What a wretched series of misunderstandings, said Genji. For my part, I had no mind to put a distance between us, but I had no experience in such affairs as this. There are many difficulties in the path of such people as I. First and foremost, I feared the anger of my father, the Emperor, and then the foolish jesting of the world. I felt myself hedged in by courtly rules and restrictions. But for all the tiresome concealments that my rank forced upon me from that first evening, I had so strangely set my heart upon her that though reason counseled me, I could not hold back, and indeed it seems sometimes to me that an irresistible fate drove me to do the thing of which I now so bitterly and continually repent. But tell me more about her, for there can now be no reason for concealment. When, on each seventh day, I caused the names of the Buddhas to be written for her comfort and salvation, whom am I to name in my inward prayer? There can be no harm in my telling you that, said Ukon, and I should have done so before. Did I not somehow feel it a shame to be prating to you now about things she would not have me speak of while she was alive? Her parents died when she was quite small. Her father, Sammi Chujo, loved her very dearly, but felt always that he could not give her all the advantages to which her great beauty entitled her, and still perplexed about her future and how best to do his duty by her, he died. Soon afterwards, some accident brought her into the company of Tono Chujo, who was at that time still a lieutenant, and for 3 years he made her very happy. But in the autumn of last year, disquieting letters began to arrive from the Great Hall of the Right, and, being by nature prone to fits of unreasoning fits, she now fell into a wild panic, and fled to the western part of the town, where she hid herself in the house of her old wet nurse. Here she was very uncomfortable, and had planned to move to a certain village in the hills, when she discovered that it would be unlucky, owing to the position of the stars since the beginning of the year, to make a journey in that direction. And, though she never told me so, I think, sir, it troubled her sorely that you should have come upon her when she was living in so wretched a place. But there was never anyone in the world like my lady for keeping things to herself. She could never bear that other people should know what was on her mind. I have no doubt, sir, that sometimes she behaved very oddly to you, and that you've seen all this for yourself. Yes, this was all just as Tono Chujo had described. I think there was some mention of a child that Chujo was vexed to have lost sight of, said Genji, more interested than ever. Am I right? Yes, indeed, she answered. It was born in the spring of last year. A girl, and a fine child it was. Where is it now? Asked Genji. Could you get hold of it, and bring it to me here, without letting anyone know where you were taking it? It would be a great comfort to me in my present misery to have some remembrance of her near me. And he added, I ought, of course, to tell Chujo, but that would lead to useless and painful discussions about what has happened. Somehow or other, I will manage to bring her up here, in my palace. I think there can be no harm in that. And you will easily enough find some story to tell to whatever people are now looking after her. I am very glad that this has entered into your head, said Ukon. It would be a poor lookout for her to grow up in the quarter where she is now living, with no one properly belonging to her and in such a part of the town. In the stillness of the evening, under a sky of exquisite beauty, here and there, along the borders in front of his palace, some insect croaked its song. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and as he looked upon this pleasant picture, he felt ashamed at the contrast between his surroundings and the little house where Yugao had lived. Suddenly, Somewhere among the bamboo groves, the bird called Iebato uttered its sharp note. He remembered just how she had looked when in the gardens of that fatal house the same bird had startled her by its cry, and turning to Ukon, "How old was she?" he suddenly asked. "For though she seemed childlike in her diffidence and helplessness, that may only have been a sign that she was not long for this world." "She must have been 19, said Ukon. "When my mother, who was her first wet nurse, died and left me an orphan, my lady's father was pleased to notice me and reared me at his lady's side." "Ah, sir, when I think of it, I do not know how I shall live without her. For kind as people here may be, I do not seem to get used to them. I suppose it is that I knew her ways. Poor lady, she having been my mistress for so many years." To Genji, even the din of the cloth-beater's mallets had become dear through recollection, and, as he lay in bed, he repeated those verses of Po Chui. "In the 8th month, and 9th month, when the nights are growing long, 1,000 times, 10,000 times the fuller's stick beats." The young brother still waited upon him, but he no longer brought with him the letters which he had been used to bring. Utsusemi thought he had at last decided that her treatment of him was too unfriendly to be borne, and was vexed that he should feel so. Then, suddenly, she heard of his illness, and all her vexation turned to consternation and anxiety. She was soon to set out upon her long journey, but this did not much interest her, and to see whether Genji had quite forgotten her, she sent him a message, saying that she had been able to find no words in which to express her grief at hearing the news of his illness. With it, she sent the poem, "I did not ask for news, and you did not ask why I was silent, so the days wore on, and I remained in sorrow and dismay." He had not forgotten her, no, not in all his trouble, and his answer came, "Of this life, fragile as the Utsusemi's shell, already I was weary, when your word came and gave me strength to live anew." The poem was written in a very tremulous and confused hand, but she thought the writing very beautiful, and it delighted her that he had not forgotten how cicada-like she had shed her scarf. There could be no harm in this interchange of notes, but she had no intention of arranging a meeting. She thought that at last even he had seen that there could be no sense in that. As for Utsusemi's companion, she was not yet married, and Genji heard that she had become the mistress of Todo Chujo's brother, Kurodo no Shosho. And though he feared that Shosho might already have taken very ill the discovery that he was not first in the field, and did not at all wish to offend him, yet he had a certain curiosity about the girl, and sent Utsusemi's little brother with a message asking if she had heard of his illness, and the poem, "Had I not once gathered for my pillow a handful of the sedge that grows upon the eaves, not a dewdrop of pretext could my present message find." It was an acrostic with many hidden meanings. He tied the letter to a tall reed and bade him deliver it secretly, but afterwards, very uneasy at the thought that it might go astray. If it falls into Shosho's hands, he thought, he will at once guess that it was I who was before him. But after all, Shosho would probably not take that so very hard. Genji had vanity enough to think. Vain indeed. Yikes. The boy delivered the message when Shosho was at a safe distance. She could not help feeling a little hurt, but it was something that he had remembered her at all, and justifying it to herself with the excuse that she had had no time to do anything better, she sent the boy straight back with the verse, "The faint wind of your favor, that but for a moment blew, with grief, has part befrosted the small sedge of the eaves." It was very ill written, with all sorts of ornamental but misleading strokes and flourishes. Indeed, with a complete lack of style. However, it served to remind him of the face he had first seen that evening by the lamplight. As for the other, who on that occasion had sat so stiffly facing her. What determination there had been in her face! What a steady resolution to give no quarter! The affair with the Lady of the Sedge was so unintentional, and so insignificant that though he regarded it as rather frivolous and indiscreet, he saw no great harm in it. But if he did not take himself in hand before it was too late, he would soon again be involved in some entanglement which might finally ruin his reputation. On the 49th day after Yugao's death, a service in her memory was by his orders secretly held in the Hokkaido on Mount Hiei. The ritual performed was of the most elaborate kind, everything that was required being supplied from the prince's own store, and even the decoration of the service books and images was carried out with the utmost attention. Koremitsu's brother, a man of great piety, was entrusted with the direction of the ceremony, and all went well. Next, Genji sent for his old writing master, a doctor of letters, for whom he had a great liking, and bade him write the prayer for the dead. Say that I commit to Amida the Buddha, one not named whom I loved, but lost disastrously. And he wrote out a rough draft for the learned man to amend. There is nothing to add or alter, said the master, deeply moved. Who could it be, he wondered, at whose death the prince was so distressed? For Genji, try as he might, could not hide his tears. When he was secretly looking through his store for largesse to give to the Hokkaido priests, he came upon a certain dress, and as he folded it, made the poem, "The girdle that today with tears I knot, shall we ever in some new life untie?" Till now, her spirit had wandered in the void, but already she must be setting out for her new life path, and in great solicitude he prayed continually for her safety. He met Tono Chujo, and his heart beat violently, for he had longed to tell him about Yugao's child, and how it was to be reared. But he feared that the rest of the story would needlessly anger and distress him, and he did not mention the matter. Meanwhile, the servants of Yugao's house were surprised that they had had no news from her, nor even from Ukon, and had begun to be seriously disquieted. They had still no proof that it was Genji who was her lover, but several of them thought that they recognized him, and his name was whispered among them. They would have it that Koremitsu knew the secret, but he pretended to know nothing whatever about Yugao's lover, and found a way to put off all their questions. And, as he was still frequenting the house for his own purposes, it was easy for them to believe that he was not really concerned in their mistress's affairs. Perhaps, after all, it was some blackguard of a Zurio's son who, frightened of Tono Chujo's interference, had carried her off to his province. The real owner of the house was a daughter of Yugao's second wet nurse, who had 3 children of her own. Ukon had been brought up with them, but they thought that it was, perhaps, because she was not their own sister, that Ukon had sent them no news of their mistress, and they were in great distress. Ukon, who knew that they would assail her with questions which her promise to Genji forbade her to answer, dared not go to the house, not even to get news of her lady's child. It had been put out somewhere to nurse, but to her great sorrow she had quite lost sight of it. Longing all the while to see her face once more, though only in a dream, upon the night after the ceremony on Mount Hiei, she had a vision very different from that for which she prayed. There appeared to him once more, just as on that fatal night, the figure of a woman in menacing posture, and he was dismayed at the thought that some demon which haunted the desolate spot might, on the occasion when it did that terrible thing, also have entered into him and possessed him. Ionosuke was to start early in the godless month, and had announced that his wife would go with him. Genji sent very handsome parting presents, and among them, with special intent, he put many very exquisite combs and fans. With them were silk strips to offer to the god of journeys, and, above all, the scarf which he had dropped. and tied to it a poem in which he said that he had kept it in remembrance of her while there was still hope of their meeting, but now returned it wet with tears shed in vain. There was a long letter with the poem, but this was of no particular interest, and is here omitted. She sent no answer by the man who had brought the presents, but gave her brother the poem, that to the changed cicada you should return her summer dress shows that you too have changed, and fills an insect heart with woe. He thought long about her, though she had with so strange and inexplicable a resolution steeled her heart against him to the end, yet each time he remembered that she had gone forever, it filled him with depression. It was the first day of the 10th month, and as though in sign that winter had indeed begun, heavy rain fell. All day long, Genji watched the stormy sky. Autumn had hideously bereaved him, and winter already was taking from him one whom he dearly loved. Now, like a traveler who has tried 2 ways in vain, I stand perplexed where these sad seasons meet. Now, at least we must suppose he was convinced that such secret adventures led only to misery. I should indeed be very loath to recount in all their detail manners which he took so much trouble to conceal. Did I not know that if you found I had omitted anything, you would at once ask why? Just because he was supposed to be an emperor's son, I must needs put a favorable showing on his conduct by leaving out all his indiscretions. And you would soon be saying that this was no history, but a mere made-up tale designed to influence the judgment of posterity. As it is, I shall be called a scandalmonger, but that I cannot help. And that brings us, at last, to the end of chapter 4. That one was a doozy. Good goodness. We started that chapter with, it was about a quarter of the way in. That one had some heft to it, for sure. But, so there was a lot that went on there. The mysterious rendezvous with Yugo, her equally mysterious passing after having ignored all of the red flags, Genji deciding that he's going to try and find and raise his almost mistress's daughter as his own, or just to raise her as in any such way, while hiding that fact from the child's father, Tono Chujo, who is his friend, mind you. And here we get the hint of one of the more icky bits of Genji, where, if I recall correctly, this child is the one that he raises as his ideal. I think it's always innocent enough, but there are certainly rather heavy grooming implications that are squicky. So, that's something for a later session. That actually may be in a later volume, because I think that it takes a good while for her to be found and to be raised up. But we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, so that chapter was jam-packed of things. Not only did he find a new mistress, he lost a mistress. He tried to rekindle a connection with Uchisemi, who he had in the last chapter, or who he'd never actually connected with, but was in the orbit of. He reconnected, or he rekindled a bit of a connection with Uchisemi's friend, who he had been with, and found that she was going to be married off to another acquaintance of his, and he's musing on the fact that his friend is not likely to enjoy the fact that she is coming into that marriage having already known someone else, which nowadays we don't really care so much about that, but At the time, yeah. Yeah, the bit about not leaving out his questionable behaviors. Yeah, Genji is... He's got his share of flaws, shall we say. And he's at least conscious that a lot of his behaviors and activities are best left outside of the public view. He knows that, going out and cheating, because through all this, remember, he's married. Yes, Genji is married. He doesn't much care for his wife, but that fact stands. All of these misadventures are compounded by that fact. So, yeah. Genji is sowing his wild oats, shall we say. Ay, ay, ay. Alright, let's go ahead and take a few minutes, stretch our legs, top up our drinks, try and stay warm. It's kind of chilly around here, at least. And we will be back in just a few minutes, where we will continue with Chapter 5, Murasaki. And yeah, Noble at the time, that this would all be relatively normal. There's a little bit of extra implications because he's of the actual imperial family, that he should be at a higher standard, but also it's expected. Anyway, yeah, so stepping away, we'll be back in just a few minutes at where we will continue. Alright, we are back. The camera is not, so let's see if we can get that kicked back in. Maybe. Perhaps. Not yet. We're certainly not enjoying this. It is not having a good time tonight. Camera might be Kaputski. Usually it kicks back in after flipping it once, but not this time. Alright, I think it is well and truly dead. Well, on the bright side, the new one is on order. That should be in on Tuesday or so, and we'll see whether it behaves itself a little bit better. This one has had a good few years. I think I bought this one back at the start of COVID, so it's had its good mileage in. Yep, we are PNG tuber, not even animated PNG tuber tonight, but it is what it is. We'll get through. Hopefully, we just need to deal with it for the latter half of tonight, and then we'll be back to normal. Hopefully, with maybe even better tracking next week. Because it should be. I mean, cameras are more or less plug and play, and you get a good Logitech one, and it's going to do the job, right? Alright, well, let's just go ahead and... The beauty of our format is... Yes, it's minorly annoying that we lose the animation and the blinking and the breathing and the talking and the leading and all that, but... it's not the end of the world. We'll just continue reading and it'll be fine. So, let's go ahead and resume where we left off with Chapter 5 of Genji Monogatari Murasaki. Now, this one is another doozy of a chapter, so we are certainly not going to finish this chapter tonight. So we'll keep an eye out for a decent breaking point, and we'll step aside for a little while. So, Chapter 5, Murasaki. He fell sick of an egg. Then, and when numerous charms and spells had been tried in vain, the illness many times returning, someone said that in a certain temple on the northern hills there lived a wise and holy man who in the summer of the year before, the ague was then rife and the usual spells were giving no relief, was able to work many signal cures. Lose no time in consulting him, for while you try one useless means after another, the disease gains greater hold upon you. At once he sent a messenger to fetch the holy man, who, however, replied that the infirmities of old age no longer permitted him to go abroad. "What is to be done?" said Genji. "I must go secretly to visit him." And taking only 4 or 5 trusted servants, he set out long before dawn. The place lay somewhat deep into the hills. It was the last day of the 3rd month, and in the capital the blossoms had all fallen. The hill cherry was not yet out, but as he approached the open country, the mists began to assume strange and lovely forms, which pleased him more than before. Being one whose movements were tethered by many proprieties, he had seldom seen such sights before. The temples, too, delighted him. The holy man lived in a deep cave, hollowed out of a high wall of rock. Genji did not send in his name, and was in close disguise. But his face was well known, and the priest at once recognized him. "Forgive me," he said. "It was you, was it not, who sent for me the other day? Alas, I think no longer of the things of this world, and I am afraid I have forgotten how to work my cures. I am very sorry indeed that you've come so far." And pretending to be very much upset, he looked at Genji, laughing. But it was soon apparent that he was a man of very great piety and learning. He wrote out certain talismans, and administered them, and read certain spells. By the time this was over, the sun had risen, and Genji went a little way outside of the cave, and looked around him. From the high ground where he was standing, he looked down on a number of scattered hermitages. A winding track led down to a hut, which, though it was hedged with the same small brushwood as the rest, was more spaciously planned, having a pleasant roofed alley running out from it, and there were trim copses set around. He asked whose house it was, and was told by one of his men that a certain abbot had been living there in retirement for 2 years. "I know him well," said Genji on hearing the abbot's name. "I should not like to meet him dressed and attended as I am. I hope he will not hear." Just then, a party of nicely dressed children came out of the house, and began to pluck such flowers as are used for the decoration of altars and holy images. "There are some girls with them," said one of Genji's men. "We cannot suppose that his reverence keeps them. Who then can they be?" And to satisfy his curiosity, he went a little way down the hill and watched them. "Yes, there are some very pretty girls, some of them grown up and others quite children," he came back and reported. Oh yes, all of Genji's men watching out for literally any girl. During a great part of the morning, Genji was busy with his cure. When, at last, the ceremony was completed, his attendants, dreading the hour at which the fever usually returned, strove to distract his attention by taking him a little way across the mountain to a point from which the capital could be seen. "How lovely," cried Genji, "are those distances half lost in haze, and that blur of shimmering woods that stretches out on every side. How could anyone be unhappy for a single instant who lived in such a place?" "This is nothing," said one of his men. "If I could but show you the lakes and mountains of other provinces, you would soon see how far they excel all that here you admire." And he began to tell him, first of Mount Fuji, and many other famous peak, and then of the West Country, with all its pleasant bays and shores, till he quite forgot that it was the hour of his fever. "Yonder, nearest to us," the man continued, pointing to the sea, "is the bay of Akashi in Harima. Note it well, for though it is not a very out-of-the-way place, yet the feeling one has there of being shut off from everything, save one huge waste of sea, makes it the strangest and most desolate spot I know. And there it is that the daughter of a lay priest, who was once a governor of the province, presides over a mansion of quite disproportionate and unexpected magnificence. He is the descendant of a prime minister, and was expected to cut a great figure in the world, but he is a man of very singular disposition, and is averse to all society. For a time he was an officer in the palace guard, but he gave this up, and accepted the province of Harima. However, he soon quarreled with the local people, and, announcing that he had been badly treated, and was going back to the capital, he did nothing of the sort, but shaved his head and became a lay priest. Then, instead of settling, as is usually done, on some secluded hillside, he built himself a house on the seashore, which may seem to you a very strange thing to do, but as a matter of fact, whereas in that province, in one place or another, a good many recluses have taken up their abode. The mountain country is far more dull and lonely, and would sorely have tried the patience of his young wife and child. And so, as a compromise, he chose the seashore. Once, when I was traveling in the province of Harima, I took occasion to visit his house, and noted that, though at the capital he had lived in a very modest style, here he had built on the most magnificent and lavish scale, as though determined, in spite of what had happened, now that he was free from the bother of governing the province, to spend the rest of his days in the greatest comfort imaginable. But all the while he was making great preparations for the life to come, and no ordained priest could have led a more austere and pious life. "But you spoke of his daughter," said Genji. "She is passably good-looking," he answered, "and not by any means stupid. Several governors and officers of the province have set their hearts upon her, and pressed their suit most urgently. But her father has sent them all away. It seems that, though in his own person so indifferent to worldly glory, he is determined that this one child, his only object of care, should make amends for his obscurity, and has sworn that if ever she chooses against his will, and when he is gone, flouts his set purpose and injunction to satisfy some idle fancy of her own, his ghost will rise and call upon the sea to cover her." Genji listened with great attention. "Why, she is like the Vestal Virgin, who may know no husband but the King Dragon of the Sea." And they laughed at the old ex-governor's absurd ambitions. The teller of the story was a son of the present governor of Harima, who, from being a clerk in the treasury, had last year been captain officer of the 5th rank. He was famous for his love adventures, and the others whispered to one another that it was with every intention of persuading the lady to disobey her father's injunctions that he had gone out of his way to visit the shore of Akashi. Yeah. It did not take Genji very long to realize that, you say there's a woman. "I fear her breeding must be somewhat countrified," said one. "It cannot well be otherwise, seeing that she was grown up with no other company than that of her old-fashioned parents. Though, indeed, it appears that her mother was a person of some consequence." "Why, yes," said Yoshikiyo, the governor's son. "And for this reason, she was able to secure little girls and boys from all the best houses in the capital, persuading them to pay visits to the seaside and be playmates to her own little girl, who thus acquired the most polished breeding." "If an unscrupulous person were to find himself in that quarter," said another, "I fear that, despite the dead father's curse, he might not find it easy to resist her." Okay, so Genji is just surrounded by the same folk. The story made a deep impression upon Genji's imagination. As his gentleman well knew, whatever was fantastic or grotesque both in people and situations at once strongly attracted him. They were therefore not surprised to see him listen with so much attention. "It is now well past noon," said one of them, "and I think we may reckon that you will get safely through the day without a return of your complaint. So, let us soon be starting for home." But the priest persuaded him to stay a little longer. "The sinister influences are not yet wholly banished," he said. "It would be well that a further ritual should continue quietly during the night. By tomorrow morning, I think you will be able to proceed." His gentlemen all urged him to stay, nor was he at all unwilling, for the novelty of such a lodging amused him. "Very well, then, at dawn," he said. And having nothing to do till bedtime, which was still a long way off, he went out onto the hillside, and under cover of the heavy evening mist, loitered near the brushwood ledge. His attendants had gone back to the hermit's cave, and only Koremitsu was with him. In the western wing, opposite which he was standing, was a nun at her devotions. The blind was partly raised. He thought she seemed to be dedicating flowers to an image. Sitting near the middle pillar, a sutra book propped upon a stool by her side, was another nun. She was reading aloud. There was a look of great unhappiness in her face. She seemed to be about 40, not a woman of the common people. Her skin was white and very fine, and though she was much emaciated, there was a certain roundness and fullness in her cheeks, and her hair, clipped short on a level with her eyes, hung in so delicate a fringe across her brow that she looked, thought Genji, more elegant and even fashionable in this current guise than if her hair had been long. Two very well-conditioned maids waited upon her. Several little girls came running in and out of the room at play. Among them was one who seemed to be about 10 years old. She came running into the room dressed in a rather worn white frock, lined with stuff of a deep saffron color. Never had he seen a child like this. What an astonishing creature she would grow into. Genji, come on, man. Her hair, thick and wavy, stood out fan-wise about her head. She was very flushed, and her lips were trembling. What is it? Have you quarreled with one of the other little girls? The nun raised her head as she spoke, and Genji fancied that there was some resemblance between her and the child. No doubt she was its mother. Inu has let out my sparrow, the little one that I kept in the clothes basket, she said, looking very unhappy. What a tiresome boy that Inu is, said one of the two maids. He deserves a good scolding for playing such a stupid trick. Where can it have got to? And this after we had taken so much trouble to tame it nicely. I only hope the crows have not found it. And so saying, she left the room. She was a pleasant-looking woman, with very long, wavy hair. The others called her Nurse Shonagon, and she seemed to be in charge of the child. Come, said the nun to the little girl, you must not be such a baby. You're thinking all the time of things that do not matter at all. Just fancy. Even now, when I am so ill that any day I may be taken from you, you do not trouble your head about me, but are grieving about a sparrow. It is very unkind, particularly as I have told you, I don't know how many times, that it is naughty to shut up live things in cages. Come over here. And the child sat down beside her. Her features were very exquisite, but it was above all the way her hair grew, in cloudy masses over her temples, which thrust back in childish fashion from her forehead, that struck him as marvelously beautiful. As he watched her, and wondered what she would be like when she grew up, it suddenly occurred to him that she bore no small resemblance to one whom he had loved with all his being. And at the resemblance, he secretly wept. Oh Lord, here we go. The nun, stroking the child's hair, now said to her, It's a lovely mop, though you are so naughty about having it combed. But it worries me very much that you are still so babyish. Some children of your age are very different. Your dear mother was only 12 when your father died. Hold up. Hold up. Excuse me? Huh. Aha. Well, that's a thing. Huh. Pardon me for a moment while I reassemble the broken bits of my psyche after that one. So, all right, well, let us resume a tongue-in-cheek, because this one is gonna have to have a little bit of forbearance on it. Your dear mother was only 12 when her father died. Oh, her father died. Okay, Jesus Christ. Okay, that is less bad. I for some reason I thought they were talking about. Oh, okay. Woo! Woo! Okay. Alright. Your dear mother was only 12 when her father died, yet she showed herself quite capable of managing her own affairs. But if I were taken from you now, I do not know what would become of you. I do not indeed." And she began to weep. Even Genji, peeping at the scene from a distance, found himself becoming quite distressed. The girl, who had been watching the nun's face with a strange, unchildish intensity, now dropped her head disconsolately. And as she did so, her hair fell forward across her cheeks in two great waves of black. Looking at her fondly, the nun recited the poem. "Not knowing if any will come to nurture the tender leaf whereon it lies, how loath is the dewdrop to vanish in the sunny air." To which the waiting woman replied with a sigh, "O dewdrop, surely you will linger till the young budding leaf has shown in what fair form it means to grow." At this moment, the priest to whom the house belonged entered the room from the other side. "Pray, ladies," he said, "you are not unduly exposing yourselves. Are you not unduly exposing yourselves? You have chosen a bad day to take up your stand so close to the window. I have just heard that Prince Genji has come to the hermit yonder to be cured of an ague. But he has disguised himself in so mean a habit that I did not know him, and have been so near all day without going to pay my respects to him." The nun started back in horror. "How distressing! He may even have passed and seen us." And she hastened to let down her folding blind. "I am really very glad that I have had an opportunity of visiting this Prince Genji, of whom one hears so much. He is said to be so handsome that even austere old priests like myself forget in his presence the sins and sorrows of the life they have discarded, and take heart to live a little longer in a world where so much beauty dwells. But you shall hear all about it." Before the old priest had time to leave the house, Genji was on his way back to the hermit's cave. What an enchanting creature he had discovered! How right, too, his friends had been on that rainy night when they told him that on strange excursions, such as this, beauty might well be found lurking in unexpected quarters. How delightful to have strolled out by chance, and at once made so astonishing a find! Whose could this exquisite child be? He would dearly love to have her always near him, to be able to turn to her at any moment for comfort and distraction, as once he had turned to the lady in the palace. "All right, Genji. Genji. Lad. This whole butterfly flitting from one flower to the next thing, it's getting to be a little much. We're not even halfway through the first volume. And how many is this now? And this one's a child? He was already lying down in the hermit's cave when, everything being at very close quarters, he heard the voice of the old priest's disciple calling for Koremitsu. "My master has just learnt," said this disciple, "that you were lodged so near at hand, and though it grieves him that you did not in passing honor him with a visit, he would at once have paid his respects to the prince, had he not thought that Lord Genji could not be unaware of his presence in the neighborhood of this hermitage, and might perhaps have refrained from visiting him only because he did not wish to disclose the motive of his present pilgrimage. But my master would remind you," continued the man, "that we too in our poor hut could provide you with straw beds to lie on, and should be sorry if you left without honoring us." "For 10 days," answered Genji from within, "I have been suffering from an ague, which returned so constantly that I was in despair, when someone advised me to consult the hermit of this mountain, whom I accordingly visited. But thinking it would be very disagreeable for a sage of his repute, if in such a case as mine it might become known that his treatment had been unsuccessful, I was at greater pains to conceal myself than I should have been if visiting an ordinary wonder-worker. Pray, ask your master to accept this excuse, and bid him enter the cave." Thus encouraged, the priest presented himself. Genji was rather afraid of him, for though an ecclesiastic, he was a man of superior genius, very much respected in the secular world, and Genji felt that it was not at all proper to receive him in the shabby old clothes which he had used for his disguise. After giving some details of his life since he had left the capital, and come to live in retirement on this mountain, the priest begged Genji to come back with him, and visit the cold spring which flowed in the garden of his hut. There was an opportunity to see again the people who had so much interested him, but the thought of all the stories that the old priest might have told them about him made him feel rather uncomfortable. What matter? At all costs he must see that lovely child again, and he followed the old priest back to his hut. In the garden, the natural vegetation of the hillside had been turned to skillful use. There was no moon, and torches had been lit along the sides of the moat, while fairy lanterns hung on the trees. The front parlor was very nicely arranged. A heavy perfume of costly and exotic scents stole from hidden incense burners, and filled the room with a delicious fragrance. These perfumes were quite unfamiliar to Genji, and he supposed that they must have been prepared by the ladies of the inner room, who would seem to have spent considerable ingenuity in the task. The priest began to tell stories about the uncertainty of this life and the retributions of the life to come. Genji was appalled to think how heavy his own sins had already been. Sure. It was bad enough to think that he would have them on his conscience for the rest of his present life, but then there was also the life to come. What terrible punishments he had to look forward to! And all the while the priest was speaking, Genji thought of his own wickedness. What a good idea it would be to turn hermit, and to live in some place, but immediately his thoughts strayed to the lovely face which he had seen that afternoon, and, longing to know more of her. "Who lives with you here?" he asked. "It interests me to know, because I once saw this place in a dream, and was astonished to recognize it when I came here today." At this the priest laughed. "Your dreams seem to have come rather suddenly into the conversation," he said, "but I fear that if you pursue your inquiry, your expectations will be sadly disappointed. You have probably never heard of Azechi no Dainagon. He died so long ago. He married my sister, who, after his death, turned her back upon the world. Just at that time, I myself was in certain difficulties, and I was unable to visit the capital. So for company, she came to join me here in my retreat." "I have heard that Aseiji no Dainagon had a daughter. Is that so?" said Genji at a venture. "I am sure you will not think I asked the question with any indiscreet intention." "Surely." "He had an only daughter, who died about 10 years ago. Her father had always wanted to present her at court, but she would not listen. And when he was dead, and there was only my sister and the nun to look after her, she allowed some wretched go-between to introduce her to Prince Hyobukyo, whose mistress she became. His wife, a proud, relentless woman, was from the first pursued her with constant vexations and affronts. Day in and day out, this obstinate persecution continued, till, at last, she died of heartbreak. They say that unkindness cannot kill, but I shall never say so. For from this cause alone, I saw my kinswoman fall sick and perish." Then the little girl must be this lady's child, Genji realized at last, and that accounted for her resemblance to the lady in the palace. He felt more drawn towards her than ever. She was of good lineage, which is never amiss, and her rather rustic simplicity would be an actual advantage when she became his pupil, as he was now determined she should, for it would make it the easier for him to mold her unformed tastes to the pattern of his own. Genji, no. "And did the lady, whose sad story you have told me, leave no remembrance behind her?" asked Genji, still hoping to turn the conversation on to the child herself. "She died only a short while after her child was born, and it too was a girl. The charge of it fell to my sister, who is in failing health, and feels herself to be no means equal to such a responsibility. All was clear now. You will think it a very strange proposal, said Genji, but I feel that I should like to adopt this child. Perhaps you would mention this to your sister? Though others early involved me in marriage, their choice proved distasteful to me, and having, as it seems, very little relish for society, I now live entirely alone. She is, I quite realize, a mere child, and I am not proposing... Here he paused, and the priest answered, I am very much obliged to you for this offer, but I am afraid it is clear that you do not at all realize that the child in question is a mere infant. You would not even find her amusing as a casual distraction. But it is true that a girl, as she grows up, needs the backing of powerful friends, if she is to make her way in the world, and though I cannot promise you that anything will come of it, I ought certainly to mention the matter to her grandmother. His manner had suddenly become somewhat cool and severe. Genji felt that he had been indiscreet, and preserved an embarrassed silence. There is something which I ought to be doing in the hall of our Lord Amida, the priest presently continued, so I must take leave of you for a while. I must also read my vespers, but I will rejoin you afterwards. And he set out to climb the hill. Genji felt very disconsolate. It had begun to rain. A cold wind blew across the hill, carrying with it the sound of a waterfall, audible till then as a gentle intermittent plashing, but now a mighty roar, and with it, somnolently rising and falling, mingled the monotonous chanting of the scriptures. Even the most unimpressionable nature would have been plunged into melancholy by such surroundings. How much more so Prince Genji, as he lay sleepless on his bed, continually planning and counterplanning. The priest had spoken of vespers, but the hour was indeed very late. It was clear, however, that the nun was still awake, for though she was making as little noise as possible, every now and then her rosary would knock with a faint click against the praying stool. There was something alluring in the sound of this low, delicate tapping. It seemed to come from quite close. He opened a small space between the screens which divided the living room from the inner chamber, and rustled his fan. He had the impression that someone in the inner room, after a little hesitation, had come towards the screen, as though saying to herself, "It cannot be so, yet I could have sworn I heard," and then retreated a little, as though thinking, "Well, it was only my fancy after all." Now she seemed to be feeling her way in the dark, and Genji said aloud, "Follow the Lord Buddha, and though your way lies in darkness, yet shall you not go astray." Suddenly, hearing his clear young voice in the darkness, the woman had not at first the courage to reply, but at last she managed to answer, "In which direction, please, is he leading me? I am afraid I do not quite understand." "I am sorry to have startled you," said Genji. "I have only this small request to make, that you will carry to your mistress the following poem. Since first he saw the green leaf of the tender bush, never for a moment has the dew of longing dried from the traveler's sleeve." "Surely, you must know that there is no one here who understands messages of that kind," said the woman. "I wonder whom you mean." "I have a particular reason for wishing your mistress to receive the message," said Genji, "and I should be obliged if you would contrive to deliver it." The nun at once perceived that the poem referred to her grandchild, and supposed that Genji, having been wrongly informed about her age, was intending to make love to her. But how had he discovered her granddaughter's existence? For some while she pondered in great annoyance and perplexity, and at last answered prudently with a poem in which she said that he, who was but spending a night upon a traveller's dewy bed, could know little of those whose home was forever upon the cold moss of the hillside. Thus she turned his poem to a harmless meaning. "Tell her," said Genji when the message was brought back, "that I am not accustomed to carry on conversations in this indirect manner. However, shy as she may be, I must ask on this occasion to dispense with formalities and discuss the matter with me seriously." "How can he have been thus misinformed?" said the nun, still thinking that Genji imagined her granddaughter to be a grown-up woman. She was terrified at being suddenly commanded to appear before his illustrious personage, and was wondering what excuse she would make. Her maids, however, were convinced that Genji would be grievously offended if she did not appear, and at last, coming out from the women's chamber, she said to him, "Though I am no longer a young woman, I very much doubt whether I ought to come like this. But since you sent word that you would have serious business to discuss with me, I could not refuse." "Perhaps," said Genji, "you will think my proposal both ill-timed and frivolous. I can only assure you that I mean it very seriously. Let Buddha judge." But here he broke off, intimidated by her age and gravity. "You have certainly chosen a very strange manner of communicating this proposal to me, but though you have not yet said what it is, I am sure you are quite in earnest about it." Thus encouraged, Genji continued, "I was deeply touched by the story of your long widowhood, and of your daughter's death. I, too, like this poor child, was deprived in my earliest infancy of the one being who tenderly loved me, and in my childhood suffered long years of loneliness and misery. Thus, we are both in like case, and this has given me so deep a sympathy for the child that I long to make amends for what she has lost. It was then to ask if you would consent to let me play a mother's part, that at this strange and inconvenient hour I trespassed so inconsiderately upon your patience." "I am sure you are meaning to be very kind," said the nun, "but forgive me. You have evidently been misinformed. There is indeed a girl living here under my charge, but she is a mere infant, and could not be of the slightest interest to you in any way, so that I cannot consent to your proposal." "On the contrary," said Genji, "I am perfectly conversant with every detail concerning this child. But if you think my sympathy for her exaggerated or misplaced, pray pardon me for having mentioned it." It was evident that he did not in the least realize the absurdity of what he had proposed, and she saw no use in explaining herself any further. The priest was now returning, and Genji, saying that he had not expected she would at once fall in with his idea, and was confident that she would soon see the matter in a different light, closed the screen behind her. The night was almost over. In a chapel nearby, the 4 meditations of the Lawflower were being practiced. The voices of the ministrants who were now chanting the Litany of Atonement came floating on the gusty mountain wind, and with the solemn sound was mingled the roar of hurrying waters. Startled from my dream by a wandering gust of the mountain gale, I heard the waterfall, and, at the beauty of its music, wept. So Genji greeted the priest, and he in turn replied with the poem, "At the noise of a torrent, wherein I daily fill my bowl, I am scarce likely to start back in wonder and delight." "I get so used to it," he added apologetically. A heavy mist covered the morning sky, and even the chirruping of the mountain birds sounded muffled and dim. Such a variety of flowers and blossoming trees, he did not know their names, grew upon the hillside that the rocks seemed to be spread with a many-colored embroidery. Above all, he marveled at the exquisite stepping of the deer, who moved across the slope, now treading daintily, now suddenly pausing, and as he watched them, the last remnants of his sickness were dispelled by sheer delight. Though the hermit had little use of his limbs, he managed by hook or crook to perform the mystic motions of the guardian spell, and though his aged voice was husky and faltering, he read the sacred text with great dignity and fervor. Several of Genji's friends now arrived to congratulate him upon his recovery. Among them, a messenger from the palace. The priest from the hut below brought a present of strange-looking roots, for which he had gone deep into the ravine. He begged to be excused from accompanying Genji on his way. "Till the end of the year," he said, "I am bound up by a vow which must deprive me of what would have been a great pleasure. and he handed Genji the stirrup cup. "Were I but able to follow my own desires," said Genji, taking the cup, "I would not leave these hills and streams. But I hear that my father the Emperor is making anxious inquiry of me. I will come back before the blossom is over." And he recited the verse, "I will go back to the men of the city, and tell them to come quickly, lest the wild wind outstripping them should toss these blossoms from the cherry bough." The old priest, flattered by Genji's politeness and captivated by the charm of his voice, answered with the poem, "Like one who finds the aloe tree in bloom, to the flower of the mountain cherry I no longer turn my gaze. I am not, after all, quite so great a rarity as the aloe flower. I am not, after all, quite so great a rarity as the aloe flower," said Genji, smiling. Next, the hermit handed him a parting cup, with the poem, "Though seldom I open the pine tree door of my mountain cell, yet have I now seen face to face the flower few live to see." And as he looked up at Genji, his eyes filled with tears. He gave him, to keep him safe in future from all harm, a magical wand. And seeing this, the nun's brother in his turn presented a rosary brought back from Korea by Prince Shotoku. It was ornamented with jade, and was still in the same Chinese-looking box in which it had been brought from that country. The box was in an open-work bag, and a 5-leafed pine branch was with it. He also gave him some little vases of blue crystal to keep his medicines in, with little sprays of cherry blossom and wisteria along with them, and such other presents as the place could supply. Genji had sent to the capital for gifts with which to repay his reception in the mountain. First, he gave a reward to the hermit, then distributed alms to the priests who had chanted liturgies on his behalf, and finally, he gave useful presents to the poor villagers of the neighborhood. While he was reading a short passage from the scriptures in preparation for his departure, the old priest went into his house and asked his sister, the nun, whether she had any message for the prince. "It is very hard to say anything at present," she said. "Perhaps if he still felt the same inclination 4 or 5 years hence, we might begin to consider it." "That is just what I think," said the priest. Genji saw that, to his regret, that he had made no progress whatever. In answer to the nun's message, he sent a small boy who belonged to the priest's household with the following poem. "Last night, indeed, though in the grayness of twilight only, I saw the lovely flower, but today a hateful mist has hidden it utterly from my sight." The nun replied, "That I may know whether it indeed pains you so deeply to leave this flower, I shall watch intently the motions of this hazy sky." It was written in a noteworthy and very aristocratic hand, but quite without the graces of deliberate artistry. While his carriage was being got ready, a great company of young lords arrived from the great hall, saying that they had been hard put to it to discover what had become of him, and now desired to give him their escort. Among them were Tono Chujo, Sachuben, and other lesser lords who had come out of affection for the prince. "We like nothing better than waiting upon you," they said, rather aggrieved. "It was not kind of you to leave us behind, but having come so far," said another, "it would be a pity to go away without resting for a while under the shadow of these flowering trees." Whereupon they all sat down in a row upon the moss under a tall rock, and passed a rough earthenware wine jar from hand to hand. Close by them, the stream leaped over the rocks in a magnificent cascade. Tono Chujo pulled out a flute from the folds of his dress and played a few trills upon it. Sachuben, tapping idly with his fan, began to sing the Temple of Toyora. The young lords who had come to fetch him were all persons of great distinction, but so striking was Genji's appearance as he sat leaning disconsolately against the rock, that no eye was likely to be turned in any other direction. One of his attendants now performed upon the reed pipe. Someone else turned out to be a skillful show player. Presently, the old priest came out of his house carrying his zithern, and, putting it into Genji's hands, begged him to play something, that the birds of the mountain may rejoice. He protested that he was not feeling at all in the mood to play, but yielding to the priest's persuasion, he gave what was really not at all a contemptible performance. After that, they all got up and started for home. Everyone on the mountain, down to the humblest priest and youngest neophyte, was bitterly disappointed at the shortness of his stay. And there were many tears shed, while the old nun within the doors was sorry to think that she had had but that one brief glimpse of him, and might never see him again. The priest declared that, for his part, he thought the land of the rising sun in her last degenerate days ill deserved that such a prince should be born to her, and he wiped his eyes. The little girl, too, was very much pleased with him, and said he was a prettier gentleman than her own father. "If you think so, you had better become his little girl instead," said her nurse. At which the child nodded, thinking that it would be a very good plan indeed, and in future the best-dressed person in the picture she painted was called Prince Genji, and so was her handsomest doll. Alright, so this is a decent breaking point here, because now we are shifting from the mountain vista back to the capital. So we'll pick this back up on Tuesday. But we've certainly gotten into some of the icky squicky bits of Genji. There are lots of implications. There are lots of don't think about it too hard moments. But yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. But the reservations aside, being able to go out into the countryside for really the first time for him, because you must remember he's been reasonably well confined to the capital for his entire life. So going out into the countryside to mend an illness, which he seems to be getting sick just about as much as Vic was getting sick. Like, get mild sense of grief or distemper, boom, bedridden for weeks. So, there is that. He's pretty but frail. I guess it adds to the charm and mystique. But yeah, so being able to get out into the mountains and live among the people, and as he was leaving, he made the decision and remembrance to pass around gifts not only to the people that hosted him, but to the villagers and just in general to make a bit of a noblesse oblige sort of gesture to spread some wealth around. That's a nice little tidbit there. So it's like, okay, Genji is very full of contradictory sentiments. We think, yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah, he's got like good character bits. He's got like, he's upstanding. He's not cruel. But at the next moment, he's out philandering with Lord knows what women, or making arrangements to adopt a pretty little girl that he saw through a window. Like, you get whiplash if you try and keep up with it. So, we'll give it, for now, the benefit of the doubt that, yes, it is entirely platonic, and he's trying to assuage the feelings that he grew up without a mother and without anyone to love him, and he's trying to give an opportunity for a little girl who is in a similar circumstance for a better life. In the absolute best, that's the absolute best light to view this in. And we'll see how much that will shift. Are we going to get a red shift on this one, or is it going to stay about that light? That'll be a question for probably Tuesday. Because if I remember right, I think Murasaki is the child. Because each of the chapters are like named after and focused on the woman of the hour at the time. We saw Usasemi, we saw Yugao, we've got Murasaki now, which I can only assume, unless another woman comes out of the woodwork, Murasaki is the child. Ick. So, alright guys, let's go ahead and wrap up here for now. We've got... I've got a bit of a tickle on the throat coming in, so it is good that we've got tomorrow off. We will be back on Tuesday with our continued reading of Genji Monogatari. We're just shy of halfway through this first volume. So we're making very good progress. I expect probably by the end of next weekend, we'll probably be about wrapping up. Which is a pretty good pace, and that'll get us to very solidly into the middle of November, and we can start thinking of more lighthearted things to read there. So, alright. With that, as always, thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't, I suggest you put a like on the stream, maybe a subscription to the channel, let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things, and maybe direct some people our way. Alright, we will be back on Tuesday for our regularly scheduled reading. Until then, have a wonderful night. Bye now.